to the local trades council. And I started to get a closer look at how corrupting Labour was to the trade union movement. Now, it's always cast in terms of the tail wagging the dog, that somehow it's trade unions that are corrupting Labour. But from what I saw, corruption's a very strong word, and I don't mean it in a sort of legal sense. I just mean that it always seemed to be that it was Labour regional councillors or MPs, and it was always right, keep your heads down, one more heave, do whatever's good for the party, even if that wasn't what was good for ordinary trade union members.
All my life, I've seen that kind of narrative between
Yeah.
Labour and the unions. It's, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, we'll give you what you want when the time is right. But if
Yes,
you don't do
exactly.
what we want right now, then the Tories
We'll
will get
never,
back in again. It'll be a total
exactly.
disaster. That whole
Ex-
narrative.
exactly. That was it. That was what was seen round about me. And that's one of the reasons I've never joined a political party, because I think that the higher up we get, the more politicians will simply go where the power is. And if the power is on the left, they might move to the left. If the power appears to be in green policies, and we saw all the sort of major parties greenwashing their manifestos a few years ago, and now they think that votes and therefore power is to be had by pandering to UKIP. So now we're starting to see them. We saw the Home Secretary, the Shadow Home Secretary today, trying to outdo each other as to who wanted to throw the most foreigners out of the country. So politicians will go wherever there are votes to be had because that's what will give them power. And trade unions, a bit like Scotland, the trade union movement, as far as Labour are concerned, is in the bank, therefore can be taken for granted. And that was really what I was seeing. After the 92 election, around about that time, and as I say, I'd been sort of studying different things, but I really was beginning to read up about political history. And it occurred to me that the Glorious Revolution in England was a century too early. Instead of the rights of man, what we had was the power of a medieval monarch vested in Westminster. And over my lifetime, Westminster has stripped all of the regional councils in Scotland, the metropolitan councils in England, all of the layers of protection between the ordinary person and the absolute power of that monarch have been stripped away.
Hmm.
And we're just left there, you know.
Do you
Um,
remember how? Sorry, this is just a bit off topic,
yeah,
but do
no,
you
no, no.
do you remember how Thatcher offended the French at the anniversary of the French Revolution? Just because you were saying it happened too early, and we
Yeah,
missed out on all those kind of French Revolution ideals,
yeah.
which came a bit later. She went there, and it was at the it was, would it have been Mitterrand at the time? And she said, I don't know why you're celebrating. This kind of thing happened in England 100 years before, and
Yeah,
nobody had to get guillotined. Oh
yeah,
God, just because you mentioned her.
yeah, no, yeah, but that is exactly the attitude. The Glorious Revolution, oh, we had it, but they didn't. They never. It happened too early for them to understand about individual rights. So it was simply if power could be controlled by a group rather than by an individual, that was somehow better. But it's the same power.
Mhm.
And knowing that made me realise that Westminster was ungovernable, unreformable. And that was really the moment where I realised that I wanted Scotland to be independent.
So you're not big on this kind of leftist critique of independence that would be abandoning the workers of the South?
No, I'm not. I think that Westminster is a rotten edifice, and if Scottish independence kicks the first leg away from under it and makes English people remember their own radical traditions, and I don't even know if they need to, the enemy is first past the post. It gives Labour too many seats in Scotland, and it probably does give the Tories too many seats in England. Because part of the reason it took me so long to get to the stage of wanting Scotland to be independent was simply because I knew that the people that I was meeting at trade union conferences who came from Liverpool and Manchester and Birmingham were all just the same as me. That there wasn't, although we had different accents, we fundamentally had the same beliefs. The trouble is that Westminster has no way of delivering them. Westminster is about protecting the powerful, and it does that superbly. It doesn't matter whose hands are notionally on the levers. That's what Westminster will always do. And by the time anyone gets close enough to the levers of power, they've usually been so thoroughly corrupted that it will make little difference anyway. And as I say, it was just that dawning realisation. And as for that argument about abandoning the working class, we had a Labour government for 13 years, a cabinet full, as we now realise, of millionaires or semi-millionaires who didn't reverse one single piece of Margaret Thatcher's anti-trade union legislation. So for them to tell the Scottish people that they're abandoning the working class for having the nerve to try to build a better society just shows how shameless they are, as far as I'm concerned.
Forced to agree.
Yeah. So as I say, it took me the long way around. And actually, in the 1990s, when, all of this was beginning to do, it makes me sound like a really deep political thinker, but I'm probably just a bit thick and a bit slow. I actually thought the oil had run out, because obviously at that time we didn't know anything about the Macron report. All we knew about oil money was that it had gone on tax cuts and unemployment benefit for Thatcher's revolution. So it wasn't even that I thought, let's be independent and we'll be better off. I just thought, we have to get away from this place. We have to get away from that corrupt institution and take care of Scotland.
Yeah.
My son, I left school in 1979. I left school the summer Thatcher got into power. And my son left school in 2010, the year that David Cameron got into power. And I just thought, when the Yes campaign came along, I thought, I'm not going for the hat trick. I don't want that future for any possible grandchildren. So, and the other thing was, because I kind of knew the SNP, at that stage in the 90s, independence was all about the SNP. And as I say to you, I'm not a great believer in political parties. The Yes campaign's perfect for me. As it happens, the SNP, simply by standing still for the last 25 years, are now on the left, a bit like Roy Hattersley. Do you remember Roy Hattersley having been vilified as being a right-wing Labourite? Mm-hmm. Was given his first standing ovation at party conference for saying that he believed in comprehensive schools. And again, by then it was it was New Labour. And simply by standing still, he suddenly found himself on the left of the Labour Party. And I think that's happened to the SNP to a degree in Scotland. They are a mainstream social democratic party. We would have understood that in the 1970s, but the discourse has moved so far to the right now that what they're proposing seems really radical.
Yeah, it was strange. The discourse has moved so far to the right, and all of the parties, or the vast majority of them, not all the three main ones. However, when you look at some of the polls about what public opinion is, public opinion on many subjects has not shifted as far to the right as the political parties have. And then when you get round to elections and it's choice between, the lesser of two evils and so on, then people tend... But if you look at certain polls about this should be nationalised, or do you think that should be nationalised, then the public haven't... That's quite a heartening thing for me, that the fact that the public hasn't gone as far right as the parties seem to have, or the media.
But the parties are only interested... I think there are about 40 swing seats in England. I don't think any of them are in Scotland, although I could stand to be corrected. But there are something like 40 seats in any parliament, and it's always the same seats that actually decide. That's where the swing voters are, and that's what decides what party has a majority. That's how distorted the political system is under first past the post. And in fact, if they had put Bevel Max or federalism on the ballot paper, then I would probably have been quite happy and would have thought, oh, well, that's fine, that's the next stage, But it was the fact that they refused to put the thing that everyone wanted. And exactly in the same way, no one asked for water companies to be privatised in the 80s. And luckily, the Tory party at that time in Scotland was still fairly social democratic, and they refused to do it. No one asked in England to have their NHS privatised round about them in the last 3 years, but that's exactly what's happening. No one voted for the bedroom tax. None of these things, but a government that can hold a majority in Westminster wields absolute power, and there are no powers of recall. There's nothing that they can do, nothing we can do as a population. Maybe if we go out in the streets, maybe if some of their majorities look a bit shaky, they might deign to pay some attention to what we want. But look at the marches against the Iraq War 10 years ago. It didn't make a blind bit of difference. And that is a corrupt system. That is an anti-democratic system. Because the danger of it is, it actually disillusions people. So you get people that don't bother voting. I grew up in a working class housing scheme. It wasn't a surprise to me, but the folk that have been canvassing, once we got into the sort of more working class areas, and then I was, just depending on my working time, I was maybe still doing stalls at the weekend. We were meeting up and chatting anyway, but they're going into areas that we know people don't vote. And one of the guys said to me, they're not apathetic, they're just disillusioned. Quite a lot of them are really idealistic, but these are the people that don't vote, and the main parties don't mind that either. If you won't vote for them, the second best thing for them is not to vote at all.
Mm-hmm.
They're quite happy with that. To be honest, I think what the Yes campaign is doing is really mobilising people, getting people involved and making them think this is actually something that we could do that would make a real difference to your life, because we don't want to create a mini Westminster in Holyrood. We want to create a democracy where you will be represented and not ignored.
Great. Do you think it would be a good idea to really get involved in doing voter registration campaigns then?
Yeah, that's part of what we're trying to build into our canvassing, is to get an idea, and I think it's going to be crucial. There are two important groups for me in this referendum. One of them are the Devo Maxers, who I suppose translate roughly into the don't knows. They're the people that want more power for the Parliament, but didn't necessarily want it to be independent. Now they're going to have to make a choice between Westminster and Holyrood, and they're a really important group for us to reach out and touch, because they'll have to make a decision about, well, when it comes right down to it, is the status quo or something worse than the status quo, which may well be the result of a no vote, or do you just think, let's go for broke? I didn't think we were ready for that, but yeah, let's do it. So they're an important group, but so are the people that don't vote at all, and they're the ones that are actually more likely, because they tend to be in working class housing estates. They're more likely not to vote at all, and if we can get folk there infused and signed up to vote and out and involved, even if it is just to the extent of voting, but voting to make a big difference in their lives, then that's a group that everyone ignores.
And that could really make a difference as well.
Yeah,
getting that
absolutely.
going. But
Sure it could.
yeah, also the thing you were describing before about people, yeah, let's go for it. Did you see Derek Bateman describing that as the FIF in an article the other day?
I couldn't remember where I'd seen it, but yeah, I do. And I think the more rubbish is spoken by, like Alistair Carmichael saying, oh, there's no way you would get the pound. The pound doesn't belong to anybody. It's an internationally traded currency, let alone whether the Bank of England is Scotland or England or Britain. The fact is the pound is traded internationally, and unless you want to go back to the days where you could only take £300 out of the country, which is what it was until 1979, then yes. And part of the problem we have with the media is that it's like Groundhog Day. The No campaign's allowed to come out with these assertions again and again and again, and they're never challenged. And even if they are challenged once, they can still come out with it the next time, and it's still planting that negative message.
And even after it's been proved wrong, then they'll just kind of repackage it and put the same one out again.
Exactly. And journalists, TV presenters, let's be honest, they never question it. They never, you think, do you not understand the issues? Or are you doing what you're told from somewhere higher up? Or are you actively hostile and just don't have the respect that a journalist sniffing out a good story, or,
Two other options there are lazy or dim-witted as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And neither of them come across as being very flattering. Or are you simply a propagandist who thinks that? And I think the No campaign genuinely did think that as long as they control the mainstream media, which they do, then it didn't really matter, because no other message would get out. And obviously, to an extent, podcasts, blogs, social media are all hugely important. I worry, to be honest, that we're talking to ourselves. And that can be quite heartening in some ways, but that's where doing stalls and going out and chatting doors are so important, because that's where we do talk to other people. and we can gauge genuinely how people